The conference room fell silent as the alien hologram flickered to life. Ambassador Taral of the Kaleth species stood before the United Earth Council, his 3 eyes filled with something humans rarely saw in advanced civilizations: pure terror. "The Voidfront cannot be broken," Taral said, his voice translator turning his words into flat, emotionless English. 12 species have tried. 12 species have failed. Your world has 6 months before the Kryloth Empire turns its attention to Earth. Admiral Jack Morrison leaned forward in his seat, studying the tactical display that Taral had provided. The Voidfront stretched across 3 star systems, a massive wall of warships, orbital fortresses, and weapons platforms. The numbers were staggering. Over 10,000 Kryloth vessels defended the barrier, backed by technology that had crushed every challenger for 2 centuries. "Tell me about the species that tried to break through," Morrison said. Taral's skin shifted to a darker shade, a sign of distress among his people. "The Vryn sent 4,000 ships. They lasted 3 hours. The Delphi attempted a flanking maneuver through hyperspace. The Kryloth gravity wells trapped them, and they were destroyed before they could retreat. The others? It was the same story. The Kryloth are too strong, too numerous, too prepared." The council members began arguing among themselves. Some wanted to negotiate with the Kryloth. Others insisted on building stronger defenses around Earth's colonies. A few suggested abandoning the outer settlements entirely and pulling everyone back to the Sol system. Morrison stood up, and the room quieted. At 60 years old, he had fought in every major human conflict since the colony wars. His gray hair and weathered face told the story of 3 decades in command. When he spoke, people listened. "We have a third option," Morrison said. "We attack first." The room erupted in protest. Council member Richard Blake, a thin man with expensive clothes and no military experience, jumped to his feet. "That's insane! You heard the ambassador. The Voidfront has never been breached. What makes you think we can succeed where 12 other species failed?" Morrison activated his own holographic display. "Because we have something they don't expect. Dr. Cooper, explain the resonance torpedoes." Dr. Ryan Cooper, a young scientist with messy brown hair and coffee stains on his lab coat, cleared his throat nervously. "We've discovered a frequency weakness in Kryloth shield technology. Our new torpedoes can phase through their defenses and detonate inside their ships. We've run thousands of simulations. The technology works." "Simulations aren't real combat," Blake argued. "Neither is sitting here waiting to die," Morrison shot back. "The Kryloth will come whether we're ready or not. I'd rather face them on our terms in a place of our choosing than wait for them to knock on Earth's door." The debate continued for hours. Finally, the vote was called. The motion passed by a single vote. Morrison was authorized to assemble a battle fleet and launch a preemptive strike against the Voidfront. The next 3 months were chaos. Morrison pulled ships from every corner of human space: patrol vessels, science ships, transport carriers. Anything with weapons or the ability to carry fighters was called back to the assembly point. 500 warships, 200 carriers, and countless support vessels gathered at the edge of human territory. Captain Lisa Hayes received her orders while commanding a border patrol near the colony world of New Boston. She was 38, sharp-minded, and known throughout the fleet for her tactical innovations during the colony wars. When she read that she would command the UHS Vanguard, humanity's newest and most powerful dreadnought, she felt both pride and fear. The Vanguard was a monster of a ship, stretching 2 kilometers from bow to stern. Its armor could withstand direct hits from nuclear weapons. Its rail guns could punch through a moon. And deep in its weapons, Bay sat 100 of Dr. Cooper's untested resonance torpedoes. Hayes arrived at the assembly point and took command of her ship. The crew numbered 3,000, and most of them were young. Too young, Hayes thought as she walked through the corridors. But they were eager and well-trained. Commander Kate Sullivan ran the fighter squadrons. She was 32, a pilot since she was 20, and had more combat hours than anyone else in the fleet. Her squadrons practiced day and night, running drills until every maneuver was perfect. Lieutenant Dan Foster worked at the tactical station on the Vanguard's bridge. He was only 25, fresh from the academy, but his simulation scores were the highest Hayes had ever seen. He studied the Kryloth formations obsessively, looking for weaknesses. Dr. Cooper came aboard with his team of scientists, making final adjustments to the resonance torpedoes. He barely slept, constantly checking calculations and running tests. The fate of humanity rested on his invention, and the weight of that responsibility showed in his tired eyes. As the fleet assembled, Morrison walked among the ships in a transport shuttle, visiting as many vessels as he could. He shook hands with nervous ensigns, shared meals with veteran captains, and listened to the concerns of engineers. He needed to know his people, and they needed to see their commander. On the final night before departure, Morrison stood on the bridge of his command ship and looked at the fleet through the view screen. 300,000 people had volunteered for this mission. 300,000 souls were betting everything on a plan that most experts said would fail. He opened a fleet-wide communication channel. Every screen on every ship showed his face. "I won't lie to you," Morrison began. "What we're about to do has never been done before. The Voidfront has stood for 200 years. The Kryloth Empire has conquered and enslaved dozens of species. They believe they're invincible." He paused, letting his words sink in. "But they've never fought humans. They don't know what we're capable of when our survival is at stake. They don't understand that we'd rather die fighting than live on our knees. In 24 hours, we're going to show them what happens when you threaten Earth." Morrison took a deep breath. "Some of us won't come home. I can't promise victory. I can't promise safety. But I can promise this. Whatever happens, the Kryloth will remember the day they met humanity. We're not going there to die. We're going there to win." The communication ended. Across the fleet, crews returned to their duties with renewed determination. Fear remained, but it was balanced now by purpose. The next morning, the fleet jumped to hyperspace. The journey to the Voidfront would take 3 days. Morrison spent that time reviewing tactics with his senior staff. Hayes drilled her crew relentlessly. Sullivan ran her pilots through combat scenarios. Cooper checked and rechecked his torpedoes. High Commander Zethkar of the Kryloth Empire lounged in his command throne, all 4 of his arms draped lazily over the armrests. On the main view screen, the human fleet hung in space like scattered toys. 500 ships. Pathetic. "These are the humans?" Zethkar clicked his mandibles in amusement. "The intelligence report said they only achieved faster-than-light travel 70 years ago. They're infants playing with weapons they don't understand." His second-in-command, a younger officer named Vorath, studied the tactical display with more concern. "Commander, their formation is unusual. I've never seen this defensive sphere configuration before." Zethkar waved a dismissive hand. "It doesn't matter what shape they choose. Send Battle Group 7 to destroy them. 200 ships should be more than enough to crush these insects." Vorath hesitated. "Should we not send more forces, just to be certain? And give them the honor of thinking they're worth our full attention?" Zethkar laughed, a harsh sound like metal scraping metal. "No, let them see how easily we swat them aside. It will break their spirit before they even reach the Voidfront proper." Battle Group 7 detached from the main fleet and began moving toward the human position. 200 Kryloth warships, each one larger and more heavily armed than the biggest human vessel. They moved in a traditional line formation, a wall of steel and weapons advancing to crush the enemy. On the bridge of the Vanguard, Captain Lisa Hayes watched the Kryloth ships approach. Her knuckles were white as she gripped her command chair. 200 ships. They're not even taking us seriously." Lieutenant Dan Foster studied his tactical display, his young face tight with concentration. "Captain, They're using a standard line formation. No variation, no creativity. It's like they're following a textbook. Hayes allowed herself a small smile. Then let's teach them why textbooks don't win wars. Signal Admiral Morrison. Tell him we're ready to execute his plan. Across the fleet, Admiral Jack Morrison received the message. He took a deep breath, then opened the fleet-wide channel. All ships, this is Morrison. Remember your training. Trust your crews. And when I give the signal, show these bastards what humans can do. Execute Pattern Delta on my mark. The human fleet held position as the Kryloth battle group closed to firing range. Zethkar leaned forward in his throne, expecting to see the humans scatter or attempt a desperate retreat. Instead, something strange happened. The human defensive sphere suddenly exploded into motion. Smaller ships, frigates, and destroyers shot forward at speeds that shouldn't have been possible. They zigzagged wildly, their enhanced engines pushing them to their limits. "What are they doing?" Vorath shouted. "Those small ships can't possibly damage our fleet." But the small ships weren't trying to damage anything. They were bait. The Kryloth line formation broke apart as individual ships tried to track and target the fast-moving vessels. Some Kryloth captains ignored orders and pursued the frigates, breaking formation further. In the confusion, the heavy human cruisers moved into position. They'd been hiding behind their smaller companions, and now they had perfect firing angles on the scattered Kryloth ships. "All heavy cruisers, fire at will," Morrison ordered. The human railguns opened up, sending solid slugs of depleted uranium streaking through space at a fraction of light speed. The projectiles slammed into Kryloth shields, and while the shields held, they flickered and weakened under the sustained barrage. Commander Kate Sullivan saw her opening. "All fighters launch! Attack pattern Sierra!" From the human carriers, 400 small fighters poured into space. Each one was a fraction the size of a Kryloth fighter, fast and nimble. Sullivan led the first wave personally, her hands steady on the controls as she wove through enemy fire. The Kryloth had never faced anything like this. Their fighters were large, heavily armored craft designed for ship-to-ship combat. The human fighters were like angry hornets, too small and quick to hit easily, swarming around the larger Kryloth vessels and targeting specific points: weapon arrays, sensor clusters, shield generators. Lieutenant Amy Walsh, the communications officer on Morrison's command ship, suddenly called out, "Admiral, I'm picking up Kryloth communications. They're confused, sir. They don't understand our tactics." "Good," Morrison said grimly. "Keep them confused. Captain Hayes, you're cleared for torpedo run." Hayes had been waiting for this moment. "Dr. Cooper, prepare resonance torpedoes. Target the Kryloth flagship." Dr. Ryan Cooper sat at his station, hands trembling slightly as he armed the weapons he'd spent 2 years developing. Every simulation said they would work, but simulations weren't reality. If he was wrong, if his calculations were off by even a fraction, those torpedoes would just bounce off the Kryloth shields like everything else. "Torpedoes armed and ready," Cooper said, his voice steadier than he felt. "Fire," Hayes ordered. 10 resonance torpedoes launched from the Vanguard, sleek missiles that glowed with an eerie blue light. They streaked toward the Kryloth flagship, and every human in the fleet held their breath. The torpedoes hit the Kryloth shields and vanished. For a moment, Cooper's heart stopped. Had they failed? Had the shields simply absorbed them? Then the Kryloth flagship exploded from the inside out. The torpedoes had phased through the shields exactly as designed, detonating deep within the ship's hull. Secondary explosions rippled through the massive vessel as its power core went critical. The flagship broke into 3 pieces, each section tumbling through space, trailing debris and fire. The silence on the Kryloth command channel was deafening. Then came the panic. "Their weapons passed through our shields. How is this possible? We need reinforcements. We need..." But there were no reinforcements coming. Morrison had positioned his reserve forces to cut off any retreat. The Kryloth battle group was surrounded. Captain Ben Crawford commanded a smaller cruiser called the UHS Harbinger. He saw Kryloth ships trying to flee and moved to intercept. "All forward guns, fire! Don't let them get away!" The battle turned into a massacre. Without their flagship and with their shields useless against resonance torpedoes, the Kryloth ships fell one by one. Some tried to fight, some tried to run, but the result was the same. Ensign Claire Martinez, a 23-year-old pilot flying her first real combat mission, found herself chasing a Kryloth fighter twice the size of her craft. Her hands shook on the controls, but she remembered her training. She lined up her shot, fired, and watched as the enemy fighter erupted in flames. "I got one!" she shouted over the communication channel. "Good shot, Martinez," Commander Sullivan responded. "Stay focused. There's more work to do." 3 hours after the battle began, it was over. The entire Kryloth battle group was destroyed. Debris floated through space where 200 warships once sailed. Human casualties were minimal. 3 frigates lost, 24 fighters destroyed, and fewer than 200 personnel killed. Morrison couldn't believe it. They'd done it. They'd actually done it. On the Voidfront command station, High Commander Zethkar stared at his tactical display in disbelief. 200 ships, gone. Destroyed by an enemy he'd dismissed as primitive and weak. Vorith's voice was hollow. "Commander, what are your orders?" Zethkar said nothing for a long moment. Then he activated his communication array and sent a priority message to the Kryloth homeworld. "The humans are not what we thought. We need the full fleet. We need everything." But before he could receive a response, a new transmission came through on an open channel. It was Admiral Morrison. "High Commander Zethkar, I am Admiral Jack Morrison of the United Earth Fleet. You have 12 hours to withdraw all Kryloth forces from conquered territories and begin dismantling the Voidfront. If you refuse, we will dismantle it for you. This is your only warning." Zethkar wanted to laugh. He wanted to dismiss this human's arrogance, but he'd just watched 200 of his finest ships destroyed in 3 hours. His laughter died in his throat. Morrison didn't wait for a response. "All ships advance. We're going to the Voidfront proper. They know we're coming now. Let's make sure they remember this day." The human fleet began moving deeper into the Nexus system, leaving the debris field behind. On every human ship, crews celebrated their victory, but their commanders knew the truth. That was just the first battle. The real fight was still ahead. Captain Hayes walked through the Vanguard's corridors, checking on damage and casualties. She found Dr. Cooper in the weapons bay, staring at the remaining resonance torpedoes. "They worked," Cooper said softly. "They actually worked." Hayes put a hand on his shoulder. "You saved lives today, Doctor. Your invention made this victory possible." Cooper nodded, but his expression was troubled. "How many Kryloth died on those ships?" "Thousands? Tens of thousands." The threshold system looked like a vision of hell. Massive orbital fortresses hung in space like ancient gods of war, each one bristling with enough weapons to destroy a planet. Behind them, stretched in a perfect defensive wall, sat 8,000 Kryloth warships, and surrounding everything were the gravity well generators, massive machines that prevented any ship from jumping to hyperspace within their range. Admiral Jack Morrison studied the tactical display for the 100th time, looking for something he might have missed. There was no easy way through this. A frontal assault would cost thousands of lives, maybe tens of thousands. Even with their resonance torpedoes, the numbers were against them. "We need better intelligence," Morrison said to his senior staff. "I'm sending in Captain Crawford and the Harbinger." Captain Ben Crawford received his orders with a mixture of pride and fear. The Harbinger was a stealth reconnaissance ship, designed to slip past enemy sensors. But slipping past this many enemy sensors seemed impossible. "We'll get you the information you need, Admiral," Crawford said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. The Harbinger moved slowly toward the Voidfront defenses, its stealth systems engaged. The ship was coated in special materials that absorbed sensor scans, and its engines ran so quietly they were almost impossible to detect. Crawford and his crew of 50 spent 3 days mapping the Kryloth positions, recording patrol routes, measuring shield frequencies, and intercepting communications. It was dangerous work. Twice they came within a kilometer of Kryloth patrol ships. Once, a sensor beam swept right over them, and Crawford was certain they'd been detected. But the stealth systems held, and they completed their mission. When the Harbinger returned to the fleet, Crawford delivered his data personally to Morrison. "They're strong, Admiral, but they're predictable. They rely on a centralized command system. Everything is controlled through 3 relay stations." Lieutenant Nina Alvarez, a tactical analyst who'd been with Morrison since the Colony Wars, took the data and began working through it. She was 42, quiet and brilliant. While others saw numbers and patterns, she saw weaknesses. After 18 hours of analysis, she found what they needed. "Admiral, the relay stations are the key," Nina said, displaying her findings on the main view screen. "If we can take them offline simultaneously, the entire Kryloth fleet will lose coordination. Each ship will have to operate independently. Their perfect defensive wall will fall apart." Morrison leaned forward. "Can we take out the relay stations?" "Not with ships," Nina admitted. "They're too well defended. But a small team could infiltrate them if we can get past their security codes." Commander Luke Henderson, who led the fleet's Marine forces, stepped forward. He was a big man, built like a tank with scars from a dozen battles. "My teams can do it. Get us inside and we'll shut those stations down." Morrison made his decision. "We're going with a 3-part plan. Commander Henderson, your Marines will infiltrate the relay stations. Chief Ortega, you'll coordinate electronic warfare to jam all Kryloth communications, and the moment those relays go dark, the entire fleet attacks. We hit them hard and fast before they can adapt." Chief Susan Ortega ran the fleet's electronic warfare systems. She was 35, brilliant with computers, and had a reputation for being able to hack anything. "I can jam their communications, Admiral, but only for a limited time. Maybe an hour before they adjust their frequencies." "An hour will be enough," Morrison said. "If we can't break through in an hour, we won't break through at all." The plan was set in motion. Henderson selected his best Marines, 3 teams of 20 soldiers each. They would travel in captured Kryloth transport ships that Crawford had managed to steal during his reconnaissance mission. The transports had valid Kryloth identification codes that should get them past the initial security. Lieutenant Dan Foster, the young tactical officer on the Vanguard, ran simulations of the attack plan. Every simulation showed heavy casualties, but they all showed victory as possible. Just barely possible. "Captain Hayes," Dan said quietly, "what if the Marines can't shut down the relays in time?" Hayes looked at him steadily. "Then we attack anyway. We don't have a choice. The Kryloth are preparing to invade human space. If we don't stop them here, we'll be fighting them at Earth." The Marine teams launched in their stolen transports. Henderson led the team heading to the primary relay station, the largest and most important of the 3. As they approached the station, broadcasting their false identification codes, Henderson checked his equipment one last time. "Remember your training," he told his Marines over their private channel. "Fast and precise. We get in, plant the charges, and get out. No heroes, no glory. Just the mission." The transports docked at their respective stations without incident. The Kryloth security forces, confident in their codes and protocols, waved them through. Henderson's team moved through the station corridors, trying to look like regular Kryloth workers. They made it to the reactor level before they were discovered. A Kryloth security officer noticed something wrong about the way one of the Marines moved. He raised an alarm, and suddenly the station erupted in chaos. Henderson's team dropped their disguises and fought their way forward. "Keep moving!" Henderson roared, firing his rifle at advancing Kryloth soldiers. "We have to reach the reactor core!" The fighting was brutal and close quarters. Marines fell, but the rest pushed forward. Henderson took a blast to his shoulder but kept going, his armor absorbing most of the damage. Finally, they reached the reactor core. "Plant the charges!" Henderson ordered. "We're running out of time!" On the other two relay stations, similar scenes played out. Marines fought desperately against overwhelming numbers, buying time for their demolition experts to place electromagnetic pulse charges at critical points. In the Voidfront Command Center, High Commander Zethkar finally understood what was happening. "They're attacking the relay stations! Send reinforcements immediately!" But it was too late. Henderson activated his communication link to Morrison. "Charges planted and armed. We're ready on your signal." Morrison received similar confirmations from the other two teams. He opened the fleet-wide channel. "All ships, prepare for full assault. Chief Ortega, start your jamming. Commander Henderson, blow those relays on my mark." The countdown began. 10 seconds. 9, 8. The Kryloth fleet assembled in their defensive wall, 8,000 ships standing ready. Zethkar had taken personal command, determined to crush the humans completely. He wouldn't underestimate them again. 3, 2, 1. "Mark!" Morrison shouted. 3 electromagnetic pulse charges detonated simultaneously. The relay stations went completely dark, their systems fried beyond repair. In the same instant, Chief Ortega unleashed her electronic warfare attack, flooding every Kryloth communication frequency with interference and static. The Kryloth fleet descended into chaos. Ship captains who'd relied on centralized commands for their entire careers suddenly found themselves alone. Some held position, others moved forward. A few started to retreat. The perfect defensive wall broke apart like water through a cracked dam. "All ships, attack!" Morrison ordered. "Break through the center!" The human fleet surged forward. Captain Hayes pushed the vanguard to full speed, leading the charge directly at the weakest point in the Kryloth formation. The massive dreadnought's railguns fired continuously, and resonance torpedoes streaked from its launch tubes. Commander Kate Sullivan led her fighter squadrons in a desperate assault on the gravity well generators. If they could destroy those machines, the human fleet would have an escape route if things went wrong. "Focus fire on the nearest generator," Sullivan ordered, dodging plasma bolts that filled the space around her fighter. "Concentrate your attacks on the power couplings." Ensign Claire Martinez flew beside Sullivan, her hands steady now despite the chaos around them. She'd survived the first battle and learned from it. When a Kryloth fighter got on her tail, she pulled a tight spin that the larger enemy craft couldn't match, then lined up a perfect shot. Another kill. The battle raged across the entire system. Human ships pushed through the broken Kryloth formation, exploiting the gaps that formed without centralized coordination. But the Kryloth had numbers on their side, and individual captains began adapting to the situation. On the Vanguard's bridge, Lieutenant Dan Foster called out warnings as Kryloth ships converged on their position. "Captain, we've got 15 enemy vessels closing in. They're trying to surround us." Hayes didn't hesitate. "All power to forward shields. We're not stopping for anything. If they want to surround us, they'll have to catch us first." The Vanguard plowed through enemy fire like an unstoppable force. Its heavy armor absorbed hits that would have destroyed smaller ships. When Kryloth vessels got too close, Hayes ordered ramming speed. The dreadnought's reinforced prow smashed through enemy hulls, leaving wreckage in its wake. Dr. Ryan Cooper worked frantically at his weapons station, managing the resonance torpedoes and making adjustments based on real combat data. He'd learned that the torpedoes worked even better than his simulations predicted. Each one that hit was a guaranteed kill. "We're running low on torpedoes," Cooper reported. "We've got maybe 30 left." "Make every shot count," Hayes replied. Commander Luke Henderson and his surviving Marines fought their way to the evacuation points on the relay stations. Half his team was dead or wounded, but they'd completed their mission. As they escaped in their transports, Henderson watched the stations explode behind them, taking hundreds of Kryloth personnel with them. He felt no satisfaction, just exhaustion. The battle continued for 18 hours. Human ships took damage and casualties mounted. The destroyer UHS Defiant took a direct hit to its reactor and exploded, killing all 300 crew members. The carrier UHS Independence lost half its fighter complement. Dozens of smaller vessels were destroyed. But slowly, inexorably, the human fleet pushed through. Sullivan's fighters destroyed the first gravity well generator, then the second. Escape routes opened up. The Kryloth defensive line, once perfect and unbreakable, was now full of holes. Admiral Morrison watched from his command ship as the battle reached its climax. They were winning, but the cost was higher than he'd hoped. Every casualty report felt like a knife to his heart. Then, finally, the Kryloth began to retreat. Individual captains, seeing their situation was hopeless without coordination, made the decision to flee. A few at first, then dozens, then hundreds. The great Voidfront fleet, which had stood undefeated for 2 centuries, was running. "Don't let them regroup," Morrison ordered. "Pursue and destroy. We end this here." The human fleet chased the retreating Kryloth ships, cutting down those too slow or damaged to escape. The space around the Voidfront became a graveyard of shattered warships and orbital fortresses. By the time the sun rose on the nearest inhabited planet, it was over. Over 6,000 Kryloth ships had been destroyed or disabled. The survivors fled deeper into their empire, broken and defeated. Morrison stood on the bridge of his command ship, looking at the tactical display. The Voidfront was broken. The impossible had been achieved, but the cost made him sick. 4,000 human personnel dead. 23 ships destroyed, hundreds more damaged. Captain Hayes joined him on the communication channel. "Admiral, we did it. The Voidfront is ours." "Yes," Morrison said quietly. "But at what price?" 4,000 families will receive messages saying the United Earth Council meeting was tense. Admiral Jack Morrison appeared on the holographic display from his command ship, his face showing the exhaustion of 3 weeks of continuous combat. Behind him, repair crews worked to fix damage to his vessel. Council member Richard Blake spoke first. "Admiral, congratulations on your victory at the Voidfront. However, the Council is divided on what should happen next. Some of us believe we should consolidate our position and wait to see what the Kryloth do." Morrison kept his expression neutral, though inside he wanted to scream. "The Kryloth are regrouping. Our intelligence shows they're gathering their remaining forces at a staging point near their core worlds. If we give them time to rebuild, we'll face an even stronger enemy in 6 months. But our forces are damaged," another council member argued. "We've lost ships, personnel, equipment. Don't you think a pause would be wise?" "A pause gives the enemy time to prepare," Morrison countered. "We have momentum. We have them on the defensive. If we stop now, we throw away everything we've gained." The debate continued for 2 hours. Finally, a compromise was reached. Morrison could continue the campaign, but only to liberate conquered territories. He was forbidden from attacking the Kryloth homeworld directly. It was enough. Morrison would take what he could get. Ambassador Laura Kim arrived at the fleet 3 days later with a diplomatic team. She was 50 years old, with gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. Her job was to coordinate with the species humanity was liberating and help them rebuild. The first liberated world was the Kaleth home planet. When the human fleet arrived in orbit, the Kaleth people celebrated in the streets. Ambassador Taral, who'd first brought news of the Kryloth threat to Earth, wept openly when he saw the human ships overhead. "You did it," Terral said when he met Ambassador Kim. "We thought it impossible, but you did it." Kim smiled warmly. "Admiral Morrison did the fighting. I'm here to help with what comes after. Your people are free, Ambassador. What you do with that freedom is up to you." Similar scenes played out on world after world. The insectoid Vryn offered their industrial capacity to help repair human ships. The aquatic Delphi provided medical supplies and personnel. Species that had been enemies under Kryloth rule began working together, united by their gratitude to humanity. But not all the news was good. Captain Alex Rivera commanded a fast attack squadron tasked with harassing Kryloth supply lines. He was 33, aggressive, and loved taking risks. His ships struck deep into Kryloth territory, destroying convoys and raiding outposts. "We hit them, we disappear, and we hit them again somewhere else," Rivera explained to his crews. "Keep them confused, keep them scared." His tactics worked brilliantly, but they stretched the human forces thin. Rivera's ships operated hundreds of light years ahead of the main fleet, with no backup if things went wrong. Commander Jane Porter ran fleet intelligence from Morrison's command ship. She was 41, methodical, and cautious where Rivera was reckless. She didn't like how far forward his squadron was pushing. "Admiral, I'm concerned about Captain Rivera," Jane told Morrison. "He's achieving results, but he's taking unnecessary risks. If the Kryloth figure out his patterns, they could trap him." Morrison nodded. "I know, but we need those supply lines cut. Just keep monitoring his position. If things get dangerous, I'll pull him back." Jane returned to her work, analyzing Kryloth communications and troop movements. It was tedious work, sifting through thousands of intercepted messages looking for patterns. But after 2 weeks, she found something that made her blood freeze. "Admiral, we have a problem," Jane said urgently. "The Kryloth are building something at their staging point. A large-scale weapon of some kind. I'm seeing references to a stellar disruptor in their communications." Morrison called in Dr. Ryan Cooper and the science team. They analyzed the data for hours, running calculations and comparing it against known weapon types. Cooper's face was pale when he delivered his report. "Admiral, a stellar disruptor is a weapon that causes a star to go supernova. It's theoretical technology. We didn't think it was actually possible to build one." "But the Kryloth have built one?" Morrison asked. "It appears so. And according to the energy readings Lieutenant Chris Baker detected, it's aimed at the Kaleth home system." The room fell silent. The Kaleth system had 3 inhabited planets with a combined population of 3 billion people. If that star went supernova, every living thing in the system would be incinerated. "How long until the weapon is ready to fire?" Morrison asked. "Based on the energy buildup," Cooper said quietly, 5 days, maybe less." Morrison made his decision instantly. "Signal the fleet. We're making a forced march to the Kryloth staging point. Maximum speed, no stops. We're going to destroy that weapon before they can use it." The fleet began a series of rapid hyperspace jumps, pushing their engines to dangerous limits. Ships that were already damaged from the Voidfront battle struggled to keep up. Engineers worked around the clock, performing repairs while the vessels were in transit. Captain Lisa Hayes walked through the Vanguard's engineering section, checking on the status. Commander Greg Patterson, the chief engineer, looked like he hadn't slept in days. "We're pushing the engines too hard, Captain," Greg said. "I can keep us running, but I can't guarantee we won't have a catastrophic failure." "Do your best," Hayes told him. "We don't have a choice." The forced march took its toll. 3 ships suffered engine failures and had to be left behind with skeleton crews and promises they'd be retrieved later. 2 more collided during a jump, killing over 400 people. But the fleet kept moving, driven by the knowledge that billions of lives depended on their speed. Commander Kate Sullivan's fighter pilots were exhausted. They'd been flying constant patrols since the Voidfront battle with minimal rest. But they didn't complain. They understood the stakes. Ensign Claire Martinez, who'd become one of Sullivan's most reliable pilots, nearly fell asleep during a patrol shift. Only her wingman's warning kept her from drifting into an asteroid. "Martinez, get some rest," Sullivan ordered. "That's not a request." "But Commander, we're short on pilots as it is." "I said rest. You're no good to me if you're too tired to fly straight." Martinez reluctantly obeyed, though she only managed 3 hours of sleep before the nightmares woke her. On the 4th day of the forced march, Captain Alex Rivera's squadron ran into trouble. A Kryloth patrol fleet had been lying in wait, and Rivera's ship stumbled right into their trap. The ambush was swift and brutal. Rivera lost 2 ships before he could even give the order to retreat. "All ships, emergency jump," Rivera ordered. "Get out of here!" His remaining vessels scattered, jumping to random coordinates to avoid being followed. Rivera's own ship took heavy damage, its hyperspace drive crippled. He was stranded deep in enemy territory with no way to reach the fleet, but Rivera was resourceful. He managed to send an encrypted message to Morrison before a Kryloth boarding party stormed his bridge. The message was simple. The Kryloth knew the human fleet was coming, and they were ready. Morrison received the message with a heavy heart. Rivera was probably dead or captured. More lives lost. More names to add to the growing list. But there was no time to mourn. The fleet arrived at the Kryloth staging point on the 5th day, dropping out of hyperspace directly in front of the enemy position. The stellar disruptor was massive, a construct the size of a small moon. It hung in space like a malevolent god, energy crackling across its surface. And around it, arranged in a defensive formation, were the last 2,000 ships of the Kryloth military. But that wasn't all. Lieutenant Chris Baker, the sensor specialist, detected something else. "Admiral, I'm reading unusual energy signatures throughout the system. I think they've seeded this entire area with mines. Thousands of them." Morrison studied the tactical display. The Kryloth had turned this system into a death trap. Mines, ships, and that terrible weapon. They knew humanity would come, and they'd prepared accordingly. War Marshal Kolveth, who'd taken command of Kryloth forces after Zethkar's failure, broadcast a message on all frequencies. His voice was harsh and filled with contempt. "Humans, you have destroyed the Voidfront and humiliated our empire, but your journey ends here. You cannot stop the stellar disruptor. In 2 hours, the Kaleth system will burn, and millions of their people will die screaming, and it will be your fault for daring to challenge us." The transmission showed Kolveth's face. He was old, scarred from countless battles, with eyes that held nothing but hatred. Morrison composed his response carefully. "War Marshal Kolveth, we came here to stop you from committing genocide. If you fire that weapon, you prove that your empire deserves to fall. Stand down now, and we can end this without more bloodshed." Kolveth laughed, a cold sound that sent chills through everyone who heard it. "Your mercy is weakness. Your compassion is foolishness. We will show you what true power means." The transmission ended. Captain Hayes turned to Morrison. "Orders, Admiral?" Morrison looked at his fleet. They were damaged, exhausted, outnumbered. The Kryloth had every advantage except one: desperation. The humans had more to lose. "We're going in," Morrison said. "All ships, battle stations. We've got 2 hours to destroy that weapon and every ship defending it. This is where we find out what humanity is truly made of." The fleet began moving forward, threading carefully through the minefield. Ahead of them, the Kryloth fleet waited. The stellar disruptor continued charging, its energy building toward the moment it would unleash destruction on billions of innocent lives. Lieutenant Dan Foster ran calculations on his tactical display, looking for any advantage, any weakness they could exploit. He found none. This was going to be a straight fight, numbers against determination. "Captain," Dan said quietly to Hayes, What if we can't win? The first mine detonated 3 seconds after the human fleet entered the kill zone. The explosion lit up space like a miniature star, and the shockwave rocked every ship within a kilometer. 2 human frigates were caught in the blast and simply ceased to exist. Admiral Jack Morrison gripped his command chair as more mines began exploding around the fleet. "All ships, evasive maneuvers! Sensors, find me a path through this minefield!" Lieutenant Chris Baker worked frantically at his station, scanning for the mine signatures. But the Kryloth had designed them well. The mines were small, cold, and nearly invisible until they activated. "Admiral, I can't map them all. There are too many." "Then we go through anyway," Morrison said grimly. "We don't have time for caution." The human fleet pushed forward through the deadly field. More mines exploded. The destroyer UHS Valiant took a direct hit that tore its port side open. The crew sealed the breaches and kept fighting, even as air vented into space. Behind the minefield, the Kryloth fleet opened fire. 2,000 ships unleashing everything they had. The space between the two forces filled with plasma bolts, missiles, and energy beams. Morrison split his fleet into 3 task forces, just as he'd planned. He commanded the center force, engaging the bulk of the Kryloth ships head-on. Captain Lisa Hayes led the right flank, attempting to circle around and attack the stellar disruptor directly, and Commander Kate Sullivan coordinated the fighter wings for a mass assault on the weapon's defenses. The battle was chaos from the start. Ships exploded on both sides. The human vessels had better technology and superior tactics, but the Kryloth had numbers and home field advantage. On the Vanguard's bridge, Captain Hayes watched her tactical display light up with threats. Dozens of Kryloth ships were moving to intercept her task force, trying to prevent her from reaching the disruptor. "All ships, concentrate fire on their lead vessels," Hayes ordered. "Break through their line." Lieutenant Dan Foster coordinated the weapons fire, targeting enemy ships with precision. The Vanguard's railguns hammered away at Kryloth shields, while resonance torpedoes found their marks. But the enemy kept coming. "Captain, we're taking heavy damage," Commander Greg Patterson called from engineering. "Forward shields are at 30%. We've got breaches on decks 7 through 12. "Seal what you can and keep us moving," Hayes shouted back. "We have to reach that weapon." Dr. Ryan Cooper worked at his station, managing their dwindling supply of resonance torpedoes. They'd fired over 200 since the battle began, and only 20 remained. He needed to make every shot count. Meanwhile, Commander Sullivan led 400 fighters toward the stellar disruptor. The massive weapon was protected by point defense systems and a screen of Kryloth fighters, but Sullivan had trained for this. Her pilots flew in tight formation, covering each other as they pressed the attack. Ensign Claire Martinez flew on Sullivan's wing, her fighter weaving through enemy fire with practiced skill. She'd come a long way from the nervous rookie at the first battle. Now she was a veteran, and her hands were steady on the controls. "Sullivan to all fighters! Target the power couplings at the base of the disruptor," Sullivan ordered. "That's where it's vulnerable." The fighters dove toward their target. Kryloth point defense fire lit up the space around them. Martinez watched in horror as fighters on either side of her exploded. Pilots she'd trained with and laughed with reduced to debris in an instant. But she kept flying. They all kept flying. In the center of the battle, Admiral Morrison's force was locked in a brutal slugging match with the main Kryloth fleet. War Marshal Kolveth personally commanded the Kryloth flagship, a massive dreadnought that dwarfed even the human vessels. "Admiral, Kolveth's flagship is targeting us directly," his tactical officer reported. "Good," Morrison said. "If he's focused on me, he's not paying attention to Captain Hayes. All weapons, return fire." The 2 flagships traded devastating volleys. Morrison's command ship shuddered under the impacts. The bridge lights flickered as power conduits overloaded, but Morrison's crew held their positions, firing back with everything they had. Captain Ben Crawford's stealth ship, the Harbinger, had been circling the battle looking for an opening. Crawford had held back deliberately, waiting for the right moment. Now he saw it. Kolveth's flagship had extended itself too far forward, leaving its engines exposed. "All power to weapons," Crawford ordered. "We're only going to get one shot at this." The Harbinger decloaked directly behind the Kryloth flagship and fired every weapon it had. The surprise attack caught Kolveth completely off guard. The engines of his massive ship exploded in a chain reaction that rippled through the vessel. Kolveth's last transmission was a scream of rage as his flagship broke apart around him. With their commander dead, confusion spread through the Kryloth fleet. Some ships continued fighting. Others hesitated, unsure what to do. But War Marshal Kolveth's death had broken their unity. On the Vanguard, Hayes saw her opportunity. The path to the stellar disruptor was opening. "Full speed ahead! We're making our run!" But the disruptor was still charging. Dr. Cooper analyzed the energy readings and realized they were running out of time. "Captain, that weapon will fire in less than 5 minutes. Even if we destroy it now, the energy release might trigger the supernova anyway." "Then what do we do?" Hayes demanded. Cooper's fingers flew across his console, running calculations at desperate speed. Then his eyes widened. "I can overload the power core. If I send a specialized pulse on a specific frequency, it will shut down the disruptor safely instead of destroying it." "Can you do it from here?" "No," Cooper said. "Someone needs to get within 100 meters of the disruptor and transmit the pulse directly. The interference from the battle is too strong for a long-range transmission." Lieutenant Dan Foster turned from his station. "I'll do it." Everyone on the bridge looked at him. The young officer who'd been so nervous before the first battle now stood calm and determined. "Dan, it's a suicide mission," Hayes said quietly. "You'll never make it back." "Then I won't make it back," Dan said simply. "But 3 billion people will live. That seems like a fair trade." There was no time to argue. Hayes authorized the mission, and Dan ran to the launch bay. He took a small shuttle, loaded with Cooper's transmission equipment, and launched toward the disruptor. The space between the Vanguard and the weapon was filled with explosions and weapons fire. Dan's shuttle took hits immediately. Alarms blared as systems failed. Hull breaches vented atmosphere. But Dan kept flying, his eyes locked on his target. Commander Sullivan saw the shuttle's desperate run. "All fighters, cover that shuttle! Don't let anything touch it!" The fighter wings converged around Dan's shuttle, forming a protective screen. Martinez flew so close to the shuttle she could see Dan through the viewport. She gave him a salute, which he returned. A Kryloth fighter broke through the screen and locked onto the shuttle. Martinez didn't hesitate. She put her own fighter between the enemy and Dan, taking the hit meant for him. Her fighter exploded, but the sacrifice bought Dan the seconds he needed. "Martinez, no!" Sullivan screamed, but it was too late. Dan reached the disruptor with his shuttle barely holding together. Life support was offline. He was breathing emergency air. His hands were steady as he activated the transmission equipment. Cooper's pulse transmitted perfectly. The disruptor's power core began to overload, but in a controlled manner. The dangerous energy bled off safely into space. The weapon was shutting down. Dan tried to turn his shuttle around, but the engines were completely dead. He was drifting, helpless. Then a voice crackled over his communication system. "Lieutenant Foster, this is Captain Rivera. Hold tight. I'm coming to get you." Dan couldn't believe it. Rivera had been presumed dead days ago. But somehow his damaged ship had followed the fleet, arriving just in time for the final battle. Rivera's fast attack cruiser matched velocity with the dying shuttle at impossible speed. The rescue was textbook perfect, pulling Dan aboard seconds before his shuttle's life support gave out completely. With the disruptor disabled and Kolveth dead, the remaining Kryloth ships lost their will to fight. One by one, they began broadcasting surrender signals. Some tried to flee, but Morrison's forces were positioned to intercept them. The battle was over. Admiral Morrison stood on his damaged bridge and looked at the casualty reports. Of the 500 warships that had started this campaign, only 370 remained operational. Over 40,000 human personnel had died. The fighter wings had been decimated, with losses exceeding 60%. But they had won. The stellar disruptor was disabled, the Kryloth Empire was broken, and 3 billion Kaleth people would see another sunrise. Morrison accepted the formal surrender of the remaining Kryloth forces. Ambassador Laura Kim arrived with her diplomatic team to begin negotiations for a lasting peace. The terms were harsh, but necessary. The Kryloth Empire would be dissolved. Conquered species would be freed. The Kryloth homeworld would be placed under coalition oversight until a democratic government could be established. Captain Hayes walked through the damaged corridors of the Vanguard, surveying the destruction. Whole sections of the ship were open to space. Bodies were still being recovered. It would take months to repair the vessel, if it could be repaired at all. She found Dr. Cooper in his lab, staring at the empty racks where the resonance torpedoes had been stored. "We did it," Cooper said softly. "We actually did it." "Yes," Hayes agreed, "but the cost was necessary," Cooper finished. "I know that doesn't make it easier." Commander Sullivan sat in her quarters, writing letters to the families of her fallen pilots. 147 letters. 147 young men and women who would never go home. She wrote about Ensign Claire Martinez, who'd sacrificed herself to save a single shuttle, and in doing so helped save 3 billion lives. Her hands shook as she wrote, but she forced herself to finish every letter. These families deserved to know how their loved ones died. They deserved to know it mattered. Captain Alex Rivera recovered from his ordeal in enemy territory. He'd been captured by the Kryloth but escaped when the prison facility was evacuated during the final battle. He'd stolen a damaged Kryloth ship and somehow kept it running long enough to reach the fleet. Morrison promoted him on the spot and gave him a medal for his actions. Rivera accepted both with his usual cocky grin, though those who knew him well could see the haunted look in his eyes. 5 years passed. The sector that had been dominated by the Kryloth Empire was now a peaceful coalition of free species. Trade routes flourished. Cultural exchanges brought different civilizations together. The scars of war slowly healed. A memorial was constructed at the site of the Voidfront battle. It listed the names of every human who died in the campaign, along with the names of Allied casualties. The memorial's dedication read simply, "They gave everything so others might live free." The Human Naval Academy expanded to train officers from dozens of species. Former enemies learned side by side, studying the tactics that had broken the Voidfront. The campaign became required reading for military historians across the galaxy. Captain Lisa Hayes, now Rear Admiral Hayes, commanded the Coalition's border defense fleet. She'd kept the Vanguard, despite the extensive damage. The ship had been rebuilt and upgraded, a symbol of humanity's resolve. Dr. Ryan Cooper led a research initiative focused on peaceful applications of quantum technology. His resonance torpedoes had won a war, but he hoped his future work would prevent the next one. Commander Kate Sullivan became the head of the fighter training program. Every new pilot learned about Ensign Claire Martinez and the other brave souls who died protecting others. Sullivan made sure their names were never forgotten. Admiral Morrison retired from active duty the year after the war ended. He gave his final speech at the memorial dedication ceremony, speaking about the cost of freedom and the price of peace. "We didn't seek this war," Morrison said to the assembled crowd. "We would have preferred to meet the Kryloth as friends and trading partners. But when faced with the choice between submission and resistance, we chose to fight, not for glory, not for conquest, but for the simple right to exist free from tyranny." He paused, looking out at the faces in the crowd. Humans, Kaleth, Vryn, Delphi, and even some Kryloth who'd embraced the new democratic government. The beings we honor today died so that all species in this sector could determine their own destiny. They died so that no empire would ever again have the power to threaten genocide. They died believing that freedom was worth the price. And they were right. Morrison's final words were simple. The Voidfront once symbolized oppression and fear. Now it symbolizes liberation and hope. May we never forget what it cost to transform one into the other. A young cadet stood at the memorial late one evening, reading the names carved into the stone. She was Kaleth, born after the war, studying at the Human Naval Academy. She looked up at the stars and thought about the humans who'd come from so far away to save her people. She didn't know any of them personally, but she knew their legacy. They'd proven that even the mightiest barriers could fall when free beings stood together. They'd shown that courage and determination could overcome any obstacle. The Voidfront was gone, but its lesson remained. Freedom was precious. Democracy was worth defending. And no tyranny, no matter how powerful, could stand forever against people who refused to bow. The cadet saluted the memorial and returned to her studies. She had a lot to learn if she wanted to help protect the peace that so many had died to achieve. Above her the stars shone bright and peaceful, and somewhere in that vast darkness, humanity's battle fleet stood watch, ready to face whatever challenges the future might bring. The Voidfront had collapsed before their advance, but the true victory wasn't military. It was the peace that followed, the alliances that formed, and the hope that spread across the sector. Humanity had arrived among the stars not as conquerors, but as liberators, and that made all the difference. Hayes looked at him steadily. Then we make sure we take that weapon down, even if it costs us everything. Some things are worth dying for, Lieutenant. Saving 3 billion lives is one of them. Across the fleet, similar conversations played out. Crews said quiet goodbyes. Pilots checked their weapons one last time. Engineers prepared for the worst. Admiral Morrison sat in his command chair and thought about Earth, about his wife who he'd left behind, about all the people counting on him to bring their loved ones home. He opened the fleet-wide channel one final time before the battle began. "I won't give you a speech about glory or honor," Morrison said. "We're all tired. We're all scared. We all want to go home. But 3 billion people are depending on us to stop that weapon. 3 billion lives hang in the balance. So we're going to fly into hell itself if that's what it takes. We're going to show these bastards that humanity doesn't back down. Not now. Not ever." He paused, then added quietly, "It's been an honor serving with all of you." The fleet advanced toward the Kryloth position. The final battle was about to begin. Their loved ones aren't coming home. "They saved humanity," Hayes reminded him. "They gave their lives so Earth would live." "That means something." Morrison nodded slowly. She was right, of course, but it didn't make the weight any easier to bear. Across the fleet, exhausted crews began damage control and recovery operations. Commander Kate Sullivan counted her losses: 78 fighters destroyed, 78 pilots dead. She wrote down every name, determined to remember them all. The Voidfront, which had stood for 200 years as a symbol of Kryloth power, was gone. And in its place stood humanity, bloodied but unbroken, masters of the battlefield. But they didn't know it yet. The war was far from over. "They would have killed us without hesitation," Hayes reminded him. "This is war. We didn't start it, but we're going to finish it." As the fleet continued its advance, Lieutenant Amy Walsh kept monitoring Kryloth communications. What she heard made her blood run cold. The Kryloth weren't retreating to the Voidfront. They were calling in every ship they had, preparing for a battle that would make today's fight look like a minor skirmish. She reported this to Morrison. The Admiral nodded slowly. "Good. Let them bring everything they have. We'll break them all the same." But privately, Morrison knew the hardest part was still ahead. They'd won a battle, But the war for the Voidfront was just beginning. On the third day, the fleet prepared to exit hyperspace. Every person was at their station. Every weapon was armed. Every ship was ready. Morrison sat in his command chair and gave the order. All ships, drop from hyperspace. Let's see what we're up against. The fleet emerged into normal space at the edge of the Nexus system. And there, stretching across the view screen, was the Voidfront. It was even more massive than the intelligence reports had suggested. Thousands of ships arranged in perfect formation, orbital fortresses the size of cities, weapon platforms that could destroy planets. For a moment, doubt crept into Morrison's mind. Had he led all these people to their deaths? Then his communication officer spoke. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the Kryloth fleet. They're laughing at us." Morrison's doubt vanished, replaced by cold anger. "Let them laugh," he said quietly. "They won't be laughing for long. All ships, battle stations, this is where we make history.